While an airbrush is not absolutely required for weathering, it still is an excellent tool. And so we're going to take a closer look at this, coming up on JC's Riptrack. Hi there, my name is John and welcome to JC's Riptrack. If this is your first time here and you're looking for tips and advice on how to transform your plastic models into something that you would find on the rails today, then please hit subscribe and that little bell icon so you can be notified anytime I upload a new video. So, do you use an airbrush, and if so, what is your setup? Please let me know in the comments section down below. In the last video, I made mention that an airbrush is a nice-to-have tool, but not a need-to-have when it comes to weathering models. In truth, I regard the purchase of this airbrush as perhaps the best investment that I have made in my modeling hobby. Now, I've been painting models for a long time, but it was only about 10 years ago that I took the plunge into an airbrush. And prior to that, I survived very well with just simply brushes and rattle cans. So keep that in perspective. This video is intended for anyone who is looking to purchase an airbrush, or if you already have one, how to use it better. Now, as a tool, airbrushes have been around since about the mid-1800s, and the technology on them has evolved over time, but the principles are basically the same. At its core, an airbrush is an atomizer that uses pressurized air to break a liquid down into particulate form and then spray it onto a surface. And the advantage to that is that the spray onto a surface can be very thin and it can blend in ways that brushes can't. And today, airbrushes come in many different shapes and sizes and are used in all sorts of disciplines. You can find an airbrush in automotive or full-size railroad painting shops, you can find them in the hands of a makeup artist, or you can even find them in a bakery. And of course, modelers from various different genres make use of airbrushes to create some very realistic and highly detailed models or dioramas. And of course, airbrushes are found in the hands of model railroaders, where they can be used for both painting and weathering. So let's get into it. There are numerous different types of airbrushes, let alone manufacturers, so instead of getting into specific brands for the moment, I wanted to talk about the types of airbrushes. They can be largely classified inside of this 4-quadrant grid. Knowing how they work can help you choose the type of airbrush that is best suited for you. The first axis of this grid describes the action of the brush. A single action airbrush controls air and paint at the same time. Press the trigger and the air comes out at a fixed rate and the paint along with it. On the other end, a dual action airbrush is where the trigger mechanism allows control of both the flow of air and the flow of paint separately from each other. The vertical part of this grid describes how the paint actually gets into the airstream. On the lower side of this grid, syphon-feed airbrushes attach a jar of paint with a feeder tube that opens up to the airstream, where air moves across the opening and it lowers the pressure, drawing paint up the tube and into the airstream itself, and then atomizing the paint. On the top side, gravity-feed airbrushes simply have a cup that is filled with paint. The paint flows down by gravity and is introduced into the airstream that way. A middle ground on this continuum is the side feed airbrush, and it has a paint cup that is set to the side where a combination of gravity and air pressure draw the paint into the airstream. Also, you may have heard of external and internal mix airbrushes. All this means is where the paint hits the airstream, whether inside the mechanism or out in front. Almost universally, external mix airbrushes are single action siphon feed units. Internal mix, on the other hand, uses a needle to control the flow of paint, but because of this, these types of brushes can be used for very precise spraying in ways that external brushes can't. The general rule is, the smaller the tip of the needle, the more precise the spray can be. My airbrush is a 0.3mm needle, which is really an all-rounder. Newer versions of my airbrush have the ability to swap out the needle sizes to both larger and smaller ones, but mine is fixed at 0.3mm. While airbrush needles are made of fairly hard metal, the tip is so small that extra care needs to be taken when handling them. If the tip of a needle gets bent, that could really hamper the airbrush's ability to spray smoothly and precisely. One major thing you need to know: once you have acquired an airbrush, you will need to clean your airbrush every single time you use it. This is not optional, and it must be done the instant you finish spraying. In fact, you will spend more time masking your models and cleaning your airbrush than you will actually applying the paint with it. Ron Marsh has a great video on how he does this extensive clean of his syphon feed brush. One of my future videos will be the technique that I use to clean my own gravity feed airbrush, which is also transferable to side feed units. So what airbrush do I get? I'm going to start by saying this is not about specific brands. While there are certain qualities of the brands that are out there and I have my own preferences, this is more about the purpose of each type of brush and what it can do for you, rather than who makes them. So I own both a single action external mix siphon feed airbrush as well as this gravity fed internal mix dual action airbrush. So I have experience on both ends of the spectrum. The real answer when it comes to airbrushes is, what are you going to be using the airbrush for? If you're looking for ways of spraying large areas quickly, such as scenery or painting track, then a single action airbrush is probably an inexpensive place to start. In truth, I haven't had the greatest luck with siphon feed airbrushes. For me, the bottle keeps dropping off and I often have to hold it with both hands as I'm using it. And yet I know many people who swear by them because it is very easy to switch colors and they are certainly easier to clean than a dual action like this one. Now my main airbrush is a Grex Genesis dual action internal mix gravity feed airbrush. One of the reasons why I tend to prefer a gravity feed brush as opposed to a siphon feed is that because there isn't a bottle down here, it allows me to get very close into doing the models. However, this is simply my preference, and I would not have gotten this if I hadn't first experimented with a siphon feed airbrush and at least gotten my feet wet that way. In short, if you are working on a large area or large model or scenery, then a siphon feed single action airbrush is probably all that you need, and it's a good place to start and it's quite affordable. On the other hand, if you are looking at doing some more precision work, then that's when you consider a gravity feed or a side feed internal mix unit. Now check out some of the descriptions down below if you want a more in-depth look at some of the various brands that I recommend and some of the links as to where you can acquire them. Now while I'm labeling this as a bonus tip, this is actually not optional. Without a source of air, an airbrush is completely useless. Now sources of air can range anywhere from a small can of compressed air all the way up to a big, heavy, noisy compressor. If you're buying an airbrush and don't already have a compressor, you can get a kit that includes both airbrush and compressor all together. And in fact, that's actually what I did. Now I happen to own two compressors. One of them happens to be a dedicated hobby compressor that I only use with my airbrush. The other one, on the other hand, I bought primarily for my pneumatic tools, and it sits in the garage and it's much, much larger. However, the large one can be used for airbrushing as well, and if you already have a compressor like this, you can use it. The only thing that you would need to get is a moisture trap and make sure that it has a pressure regulator as part of it. Now, hobby compressors have the advantage of being small, light, and portable. And this is the compressor that you hear, and this is all that it is. And it comes with a pressure regulator as well as a moisture trap built right in. Now the drawback to using this particular compressor is that it doesn't have a tank, and also I can't use it for more than an hour before before the compressor actually overheats, and then it shuts down and I have to let it manually cool down. And this can be a pain if I haven't cleaned my airbrush at this particular point in time. Still, it's very handy and has done everything that I've asked it to do, but it's not without a few drawbacks here and there. Now, large compressors like my large one that I have in the garage deliver much more consistent air, but they're very bulky and many of them can be very noisy. Now, the one that I have is supposed to be a quiet one and operates at about 77 decibels, although in truth, it's much louder than that when it's doing the initial tank filling, and it's certainly very loud when I discharge the air at the end. Now there is a lot more to airbrushes than what I've covered here. Needle sizes, what paints to use, how to use them, optimum air pressure, and how to do effective masking, and so on, and so on, and so on. And all of these topics I will cover in upcoming videos, especially in the Painting Basics series, which I will be starting soon. So I hope you found this helpful and informative in guiding some of the decisions that you have, whether or not you want to get an airbrush or you're looking at ways of improving or upgrading the current equipment that you have. And if you want to get the most out of your painting and weathering projects, then please hit subscribe and that little bell icon so you can be notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, if you haven't already, please check out the other videos on this channel, especially the Weathering Basics playlist. So thanks for watching, good luck, and may you keep on track.